Okay, make sure you are reviewing your map so that you know all of these countries. Remember, there is a map game found on the Canvas calendar the day before the test. All right, so we're going to go over Southeast Asia, really broad terms. So let's talk about physical geography. Physical features that are very obvious when you look at the map is that there are lots of islands. So for example, Japan has 4 main islands, but they also have 3,000 plus other little smaller islands. The Philippines have almost doubled what Japan has and has over 7,100 islands, but only 95% of the Filipinos live on only 11 of those islands. Indonesia doubles what Philippines have, and they have over 13,500 islands as well. But only 6,000, or about half of those islands, actually have people living on them. So why are there so many islands in this part of the world? The main reason is because this is on a fault line where there are lots of earthquakes and a lot of volcanoes. So it's on the Ring of Fire, and you can see, like for example, here is Japan and the Philippines, and here's Indonesia. So this Ring of Fire is all along the coast of Southeast Asia, and yes, it actually goes on the west coast of the United States and all the way down through all of the Americas. So this is the reason why there are so many, oh, okay, let me go back up here. So this is why there are so many islands in this part of the world. Now, obviously, volcanoes and earthquakes are bad because they're destructive. However, they can be good in the sense of volcanoes create a lot of fertile land, which is why many people live in this part of the world, is because they can farm. Indonesia has one of the most active volcanoes in the world, and probably the most destructive as well. All right, tsunamis. The worst tsunami in history so far occurred in 2004, and the epicenter was right off the island of Java, which is part of Indonesia, and there was an 8.9 earthquake there off the coast of Java, sent 50-foot waves, some were up to 80 foot, and it moved all the way across the Indian Ocean and actually affected the coast of Africa on the country of Somalia and Seychelles and Madagascar. There was a lot of destruction because, of course, islands are quite low already as far as sea level. So the Maldives, for example, was approximately 32 feet above sea level, and I think now geographically they're only about 8 feet above sea level, so a lot of the land was washed away, and of course a lot of people died because of the tsunami. About 200,000 people died in 2004. Mountains. In China, China is primarily mountains and deserts. So in northern China up to Russia is the Tian Shan. On the west, you have the Kunlun Mountains, you have the Kinling Mountains, and the Greater Hengan Mountains. In Nepal and North India are the Himalayan Mountains, which are the longest mountain range in the world and the highest mountain range in the world. Of course, well known for Mount Everest, which is over 29,000 feet. And to put that in perspective, that's about 5.5 miles up, and is, of course, the world's tallest mountain. And also, K2 is in the Himalaya Mountains, which is just shorter than Mount Everest at 28,251 feet, but it's much more dangerous to climb than Mount Everest because it's much steeper. And so there are 1 in 4 climbers end in death climbing K2 versus Mount Everest, which isn't quite as dangerous. Still not something I want to do. All right, plateaus and basins. Plateaus have a lot less people because it's dry. And the largest plateau and the highest plateau in this region is the Tibetan Plateau in the western part of China. The Deccan Plateau, which is in India, which is the same plateau that was there in ancient China. Not very many people live there even today. The Gobi Desert is primarily in Mongolia, north of China. And the Tarim Basin is one of the lowest regions that is below sea level. So it's below 0 feet. Rivers, most of the population lives near rivers. The same rivers were in China as today, the Yellow River to the north and the Yangtze River to the south. The Mekong River is primarily found in Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand. The Indus River, which we talked about with ancient India, is actually mostly in Pakistan today, not India. And the Ganges River, which we identified in the last chapter, is still located in the western part or the eastern part of India. Climate. Obviously, there are deserts, which is the driest part of the world. Steppe is the next driest. Humid continental is where there are 4 seasons. The humid subtropical are where you can find typhoons. And typhoons are intense tropical storms. And for some reason, in the Eastern Hemisphere, they call them typhoons. Here in the Western Hemisphere, we call them hurricanes. Philippines is probably victim to typhoons more than anybody in this part of the world, and they have on average 20 per year. We typically don't have that many here in the United States, although in 2020 it was the worst year for hurricanes during the hurricane season, so much so that they went through every letter in the alphabet, and then they had to go to the Greek alphabet to start naming the hurricanes. So I think we had near 30 hurricanes in the year 2020 in the United States. So that was an unusual year. So why would typhoons be worse in this part of the world? And the reason for that is because countries like the Philippines or Indonesia or Japan are islands, and they are lower sea level and are more concentrated with people, and so they are definitely more devastated by typhoons than mainland China, for example. It's not that typhoons don't hit mainland China just like hurricanes hit mainland the United States, but it definitely affects more islands than it would a main land. All right, rainfall. There are extremes. So of course in India you have the monsoons that we read about in chapter 2. They occur in the summer, because it's the winds that bring the rain from the moist water up from the Indian Ocean over across the Indian subcontinent, and they get anywhere from 80 to 250 inches per year, and it usually happens just in those summer months. And then you go to the other extreme where you have deserts, and to be classified as a desert, you get less than 10 inches of rain per year. So these are some examples of the monsoon rains in India, so you can see just how much rain they get, where these people are walking knee-deep, thigh-deep, chest-deep water, and it occurs every year. So it's not even unusual for them, but it is imperative to be able to water the land and actually farm. So we think it's devastating, and yes, they are, but they also look at it as life-saving for their farms. Economic geography. All right, agriculture. There is a small percentage of land in this part of the world that's farmed, yet a high percentage of people that are actually working on the farms. And the reason for that is because of size of farms and the products that they grow. So to compare farmlands, for example, in Iowa, we have over 300 acres per farm typically, and that's probably even getting bigger every year. In Japan, the typical farm would be 2.5 acres, which is the size of their farm. So clearly they need more people to work on that because they don't have the big machinery that we have. So of course they grow rice, which has to be picked by hand. They do have these small little hand machines that look somewhat like a snowblower, but really it's because that they are grown in rice paddies, and that is water-covered fields. Other products that are grown is latex or natural rubber, which is extracted from trees. tea, which are leaves picked by hand, coffee beans, which are picked by hand, coconuts, which are picked by hand. Sugar cane is a little bit more industrialized, and then spices such as cinnamon, paprika, curry, all of those sorts of spices are known to be grown in this part of the world, which is why Christopher Columbus was leaving Spain looking for the Spice Islands, which was Indonesia, and he bumps into the Americas because it was unknown that the Americas was even there at that particular point. So that's why Indonesia is known as the Spice Islands. Wheat is grown in China, but that's because China is the biggest country and has more farmland, but it's drier, so it's not going to grow things like corn or soybeans that we grow, so wheat. They also have small animals. Think about the territory. They're going to have chickens. They're going to have goats. They're going to have smaller animals. They won't have a lot of cattle. And of course, in India, cows are considered sacred. Fishing, of course, is huge for this part of the world, so much so that, yes, they can farm or they can fish typically in the oceans and seas, but they eat more fish than they can actually fish for in natural waters. So they have fish farms, and this is $1 billion a year industry, like, for example, in Hong Kong. And they can be either grown in these small artificial ponds on the right, where they're man-made ponds that they stock and breed fish, or they can be done in these vats or these tubs that are in an area where they can all be monitored. Either way, it's a huge industry, so aquaculture. Industrialization. China is known to be a very strong industrialized country, Japan as well. China, of course, we get a lot of goods from, a lot of small things, plastics, machinery, that sort of thing. Japan has been well known for having electronics and automobiles. However, lately, their economies have gone down slightly, so they're not as strong as they used to be. The next 4 countries are known as the 4 dragons or 4 tigers. Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, and South Korea are all small countries, yet they have made huge growth within industrialization. A lot of these countries are dealing with automotive parts, banking, financial, sort of online sort of things, paint, that sort of thing. The little dragons are the next 4 countries that have had a small growth as far as their economy goes in industrializations. So that is Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia. India is improving, but they have over 1 billion people, and their economy really doesn't sustain that. For example, there was a job application for a simple secretarial type job that got thousands of applications, and I don't mean 1 or 2, I mean like 10 or 15 or 20,000 applications for this one job. So it's not as strong because of that. Vietnam is also getting a little bit better. Clothing industry, textiles, those things are pretty common in Vietnam. Countries that have always been poor are Laos, Myanmar, and Mongolia. These are pictures of Bangkok, Thailand, and Jakarta, Indonesia. So they do have the hustle and bustle of big cities and industrialization as mentioned in the Little Dragons.